Let's move on to another story. I want to give some a bit of travel detail here. Ryanair have been forced to cancel nearly 100 flights leaving UK airports today due to, quote, inexplicable strike action. The budget airline is cancelling flights from Birmingham, Manchester, Leeds, Edinburgh and Belfast, with thousands of British holidaymakers set to be affected by the disruption. Let's talk more on this with the host of the Aviation Briefing podcast and editor of Airside International magazine, William Hallowell. William, good afternoon to you. This came, as a bit of a shock to Ryanair? Would that be fair?
I don't know about a shock, but look, these sorts of delays happen quite frequently over the peak summer season. As you said, 100 flights today from Birmingham, Manchester, Leeds, Edinburgh, and Belfast to Paris. French air traffic controllers are quite notorious for striking, certainly over the last year. And look, this is a bit of an ongoing feud with Ryanair and the EU Commission. The CEO, Michael O'Leary, is quite often very critical of the EU. He sees the EU as having a role in helping to deter and prevent these strikes, which obviously he's been critical and, the airline has been critical and said, look, they're not doing enough and they need to be doing more to prevent these strikes. And, there are strikes happening all over Europe, and there have been this year. They've been happening in Italy, and they're not uncommon at the moment. Post-pandemic, as an aviation journalist, it's not uncommon. Because of COVID, we've lost a lot, or the industry has lost a lot of workers. That includes the ground handlers, the customer service, all the people that we don't really think about when, as the passenger, we get on the plane and we fly, and
Sure.
all the people involved, in airport operations. Thousands in the UK and Europe and worldwide were sacked or made redundant because of the difficulties that aviation went through. They were one of the hardest hit industries during the pandemic. And recruitment and retention has been a real issue. Workers want more nowadays. They want more flexible hours. They want more pay. And I can't obviously speak for those people who are on strike, but certainly Ryanair and another, a number of low-cost carriers, they do, blame the EU, and they say that there needs to be more done for them to mitigate these strikes occurring.
It's interesting, isn't it? You've raised a really interesting point that probably doesn't get the airtime that it should do. We know that there are a lot of jobs out there. We take it for granted, really, the airline industry, don't we? You turn up at an airport with your bags, you've got your passport, hopefully, in your hand, and you're ready to go. You don't consider the myriad characters behind the scenes who are making this whole system work. I mean, the coalface, the aeroplane, the pilot and the cabin crew, we get that. But there are thousands to make this whole thing function. And it sounds like, from what you're saying, there is a desperate shortage of boots on the ground.
Yeah, there is, and it's not a UK issue, right? This is a global issue. The whole industry, I've spoken to a number of ground handlers, and the kind of C-suite executives involved at the top of these companies, and they all say the same thing. I go to a lot of these conferences where we have industry leaders talking about these issues, and they all say that post-COVID, it has been a real struggle. Passenger demand is back up. People want to fly again. This summer is set, according to British Airways, they've said that this summer is going to be the busiest since COVID. So there's a huge demand for air travel. But in terms of the employees, the ground handlers, like you say, all the people at the coalface, there is a huge labour shortage, and this extends, from the UK to Australia. It's a worldwide issue, and as I say, these strikes are not uncommon at the moment.
Indeed. Let's just move to another aeroplane story of woe, but for a very different reason. This is problems with Brits flying next month on Jet 2. Major disruption, but not the kind of disruption that ordinarily you might consider when travelling by plane. What's going on here, William?
So there are major roadworks going on the M56 from the 10th of June all the way through to August. Jet2 have put out a warning saying, passengers, we want you to be arriving earlier just to make sure you don't, miss your flights. And in terms of the details of that, the closures are set to take place between 9 p.m. and 5 a.m. Monday to Friday from the 10th of June. That extends to 7 a.m., in the morning on Saturdays. And it adds to the, added travel chaos that's expected. As I mentioned, British Airways have now said that they're going to try and bring on 350 workers in addition at Heathrow to mitigate some of the expected travel chaos, and kind of building off, what we were just talking about with Ryanair. It's kind of just, it's a small story. It's a piece of the jigsaw. There are huge issues in aviation at the moment, and these sorts of small stories, tend to snowball. And then when they get things like media attention, national media
Yeah.
attention, it's guys like us, me, I cover aviation on a daily basis. So, like I say, it's a part of a broader picture, really.
Indeed. Well, listen, William, thank you for your time. Really appreciate that. Thorough stuff from William Hallowell. He's an aviation journalist. He hosts the Aviation Briefing podcast and the editor of Airside International.